Okay, I'm ready to dive into a story that highlights how the online world, while a source of information and fun, can also pose serious risks to personal safety. Today, I'll share how an ordinary quest for companionship spiraled into a chilling ordeal, one that nearly became inescapable. This narrative unfolded in Omaha, Nebraska, close to the Iowa state line. It was in 2012 that Dave Krupka, then 34, made the move to Omaha to manage an auto repair shop he had recently come into possession of. Not long before this, he had gone through a separation from his wife, Amy Flora, with whom he shared two children. To ensure the children's well-being, the former couple maintained amicable relations and communicated effectively, seeing each other frequently. Dave was looking to start a new romantic chapter and, to this end, had set up profiles on a few different online dating platforms. He possessed a friendly, outgoing, and easy-to-approach demeanor, which naturally attracted a good number of individuals interested in meeting him and potentially starting something. At that point, Dave wasn't seeking a committed, long-term involvement, but was quite open to enjoying pleasant times with women. One autumn afternoon in 2012, a woman named Carrie Farver came by Dave's auto shop for a standard vehicle checkup. Carrie was a 37-year-old single mother. She had a son, a talented 14-year-old who was already delving into computer programming. The moment Dave's eyes met hers, he felt an instant connection, a spark. Consequently, he invited her out on a date, but she declined his offer to meet. Carrie mentioned that he wasn't quite her type, yet Dave felt such a strong pull towards her that he resolved to capture her interest. He later located her online profile and sent her a message. It wasn't immediate, but after some time, Carrie replied, and they began to exchange messages sporadically. Later on, Carrie found herself at the auto repair shop once more. They had an enjoyable conversation, and Dave, seizing the moment, asked her to dinner again. This time, she agreed. Carrie was known for her cheerful disposition, independence, and energetic nature. She had been a standout student in her school days, with teachers foreseeing a bright future for her. Carrie shared a close bond with her mother and was well loved by her circle of friends and acquaintances. She consistently wore a smile and demonstrated resilience, never giving in to difficult circumstances. Her life took a significant turn when, at 22, she became pregnant by her then-boyfriend. He wasn't pleased with the news and opted out of participating in raising the child. However, this didn't deter Carrie. She made the firm decision to keep the baby, embrace single motherhood, and not rely on men. This meant she had to temporarily pause her university studies and find employment. Carrie found a pleasant apartment near her mother, Nancy, welcomed her baby, completed her university degree, and eventually secured a more lucrative position in the IT field. Motherhood came naturally to her, and she ensured that neither she nor her child lacked anything. Up until the tragic sequence of events I'm about to describe, her entire existence was centered around her son, Max. She had ceased efforts to form new relationships, dedicating her life solely to her child. The first date between Dave and Carrie soon followed. Carrie was thoroughly pleased with the evening and her interaction with him. She later confided to a friend via social media that she hadn't laughed so genuinely in years as she did on that date. Their conversation flowed effortlessly and naturally, as if they had been acquainted for a long time. Because of this, Carrie was keen on pursuing the connection further. Dave, too, was enthusiastic about fostering a romantic involvement with Carrie, whom he found very appealing. He was quite smitten with her, and because of this, he stopped interacting with other women on dating platforms. However, there was another woman in Dave's sphere, Shauna Elizabeth Golar, who went by Liz. She was one of the initial people he'd connected with online following his separation from his wife. Liz was 38 years old and used the alias Liz on the dating site. Dave found her to be a pleasant and upbeat person. They both had children of similar ages, and she indicated that she shared Dave's preference for an open, non-exclusive relationship. Liz operated her own small business and was also a homemaker. They connected quickly and had been meeting up regularly for the preceding 6 months, engaging in a physical relationship. Over time, Liz began to exhibit increasingly possessive behavior. She desired to spend progressively more time with Dave, who cherished his autonomy and was also seeing other women. This difference in expectations led to a breakdown in their relationship, and Dave began to distance himself. Yet, Liz persisted in involving herself in his life, frequently offering unsolicited advice, which caused him considerable stress. Liz was aware that he had been dating various women before he met Carrie, and she was quick to voice her disapproval, often speaking ill of all of Dave's female companions. In an effort to create some space from his former girlfriend, Dave suggested she try dating other men, but she refused and, in a defiant gesture, deleted her profile from the dating site. Liz became jealous of other women in Dave's life, including Carrie and even his children and ex-wife, so he constantly found himself having to assert boundaries with her. During one of his dates with Carrie, Dave noticed a string of missed messages and calls. It was the persistent Liz. She urgently requested access to his apartment, claiming she had left something important there during her last visit and was demanding its return in a very insistent way. Dave informed her that he was currently on a date with the woman he was falling for and couldn't let her in at that moment, but offered to do so later when he returned home. Liz, however, began trying to convince him to come immediately, stating she needed her belongings urgently. Eventually, Dave relented. He and Carrie made their way to Dave's residence late that afternoon. They had barely stepped inside when Liz arrived, almost instantly, pounding on the door. She was shouting, demanding to be let in, and was clearly enraged. Understandably, this incident ruined the romantic atmosphere. But the considerate Carrie proposed that Dave resolve the issue with his acquaintance and then come over to her place, where they wouldn't be disturbed. Dave followed her suggestion. He opened the door, handed Liz her items, and then he and Carrie left the house. As they exited, the two women's eyes met for a fleeting second, a moment that would irrevocably alter their destinies. The new couple then drove to Carrie's home in Macedonia, Iowa, a journey that took approximately an hour. The following morning, Carrie expressed to Dave her contentment with the current nature of their relationship. She clarified that she wasn't looking for serious commitment, marriage, or more children. Dave, in turn, shared that he was unable to have more children. Much like him, Carrie was interested only in enjoyable companionship. This mutual understanding brought them even closer, as they both held similar desires and perspectives on what they wanted from a male-female relationship. This shared view also significantly hastened the progression of their connection. They were in complete sync. Dave found Carrie exceptionally attractive, intelligent, and captivating. For the subsequent 2 weeks, they saw each other almost every day. Carrie's workplace was conveniently located just a few blocks from Dave's home and auto shop, even though she resided in a neighboring town in another state. This proximity made it easy for her to drop by during the day for lunch or to spend time with Dave. She frequently stayed over at his apartment. Carrie held a well-compensated job. She occupied a significant role at a major IT corporation. Carrie dedicated the majority of her time to her career and her son, with only a small portion allocated to leisure and entertainment. All of this aligned perfectly with Dave's own life plans, though Dave started to contemplate whether he should perhaps reconsider his firm's stance against cohabitation and think about moving in with Carrie. In early November, while Carrie was staying at Dave's place, she received several friend requests on social media from individuals she didn't recognize. She observed that one of these men was from her hometown of Macedonia. She sent him a message asking, "Do I know you?" but received no response. The entire situation struck her as odd, and she mentioned it to Dave, but neither of them gave it much thought at the time. On November 13th, 2012, Dave woke up early and found his companion, Carrie, already at her laptop, making final adjustments to a new project. She was scheduled to present this project to her management team later that day. Dave kissed his lover goodbye and headed out. They had plans to meet again that evening. Later, while at work, Dave received a message from Carrie asking if he wanted to move in with her. This took Dave completely by surprise because only a few days prior, he and Carrie had discussed their relationship and mutually agreed they weren't aiming for a cohabiting, family-style arrangement, but rather preferred to simply spend time together on occasion. He found it peculiar. Even though he himself had briefly entertained the thought, he disliked feeling pressured into decisions. So, Dave politely declined the suggestion, reminding her that they had already covered this ground and had decided to maintain the current arrangement for the time being. In response, the person on the other end unleashed a barrage of profanities at him. Judging by the text messages, she was absolutely furious and seemed to despise him. The messages were filled with hysterical threats, and it appeared that his relationship with the woman he thought was his dream partner had abruptly ended. Dave didn't recognize the lover he knew in these remarks and was stunned by her outburst. He ceased all communication with her and returned home after his workday. None of Carrie's belongings were left in his house. It seemed she had accepted their breakup and had removed all her possessions. A few days later, police officers arrived at his auto repair shop. The law enforcement officials informed Dave that his girlfriend, Carrie Farver, was reported missing. As it turned out, he was the last person known to have seen her alive that morning when he kissed her goodbye. She never arrived at work. Since that point, none of her acquaintances had been able to reach her. Dave explained that he was unaware of her whereabouts and shared their final text exchange with the investigators. He clarified that on that particular day, Carrie had communicated with him in an unusually bold and rude fashion, which was entirely out of character for her. He had become upset and had cut off contact, but afterward, he felt troubled and wondered if Carrie, who always communicated politely, could genuinely have sent such messages. Detectives began speaking with the missing woman's loved ones, and through these conversations, they managed to piece together some of the events of that day. On the morning of November 13th, 2012, Dave left the house after kissing Carrie goodbye, and she was preparing to go to work. Later that day, Carrie's mother received unsettling messages from her daughter's phone, in which Carrie confessed to breaking up with her boyfriend and, as a result, being admitted to a mental hospital due to a nervous breakdown. This message greatly alarmed her mother, causing her to panic, but she was unable to locate her daughter in any clinic. Meanwhile, Carrie failed to show up for work on what was a significant day for her, as she was due to present a new project. This was alarming enough. Later, her employer received a message stating that Carrie had accepted a new job in Kansas and would no longer be working for him. This message also came as a surprise to the missing woman's superiors, given how much she valued her job. Her son, Max, also received a message from Carrie. She wrote that she was planning to attend her stepbrother's wedding. The issue was that the wedding had already occurred, and she hadn't been there. All these pieces of information deeply concerned Carrie's relatives, colleagues, and friends. The various reports were contradictory and couldn't all be true. No one believed that Carrie would abandon her son and relocate to another state merely for a job. It seemed either Carrie was deliberately concealing something from everyone, or she was in serious trouble. Consequently, after discussing the matter amongst themselves, her relatives filed a police report concerning her disappearance. Dave was utterly bewildered by the unfolding events and found it hard to believe what was happening. The man granted police officers unrestricted access to inspect his vehicle and his cell phone. He actively cooperated with the investigation and endeavored to assist in the search for his beloved. Dave informed law enforcement officials that he had only been in a relationship with a missing woman for a few weeks, but during that brief period, they had grown very close. Carrie had always been amiable and composed, but following her disappearance, which he wasn't aware of at that exact moment, he was inundated with aggressive messages containing insults and threats on social media. The police found the man's account credible, especially since he cooperated with them willingly. He was visibly distressed by her disappearance and successfully passed a polygraph examination. There was genuinely no apparent motive for him to harm his lover. Then, the detectives shared some interesting information about her. Officers informed him that Carrie had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder when she was just over 20 years old. They suggested she could experience similar psychotic episodes if she wasn't taking her prescribed medication. This could potentially explain the strangely aggressive messages. Detectives explained to the concerned Dave that Carrie might have lost control if her medication ran out while she was at his place, possibly triggering a severe episode. Once she was located, they assured him she would resume her medication and the problem she was experiencing would cease. This information offered some reassurance to Dave, and he promised the police he would provide them with any new information if the missing person made contact again. However, all this was merely the prelude to the madness that was about to engulf him. Subsequently, he began to receive a regular stream of vile messages filled with threats and insults from anonymous social media profiles. The correspondence aggressively targeted women Dave knew, particularly his acquaintance Liz. The volume of such messages reached up to 60 per day. The number of accounts and messaging platforms used to contact him steadily grew. Everyone he knew started receiving the same ominous messages. All of this terrified Dave, who reported the threats to the police. One of the women Dave had dated before meeting Carrie informed the police that she too had encountered similar issues. After her first date with Dave, she was virtually bombarded with threats, promising her children would be harmed if she ever met him again, which led the girl to cease all communication with Dave. From there, things took an even worse turn. All of Dave's acquaintances began receiving messages alleging that he was a despicable individual who abused women. This information circulated virtually everywhere and was also actively disseminated on dating sites. Consequently, the harassers' actions resulted in Dave being inundated with insulting messages, even from people he didn't know. He found himself constantly having to defend himself, explaining to everyone that he had never laid a hand on a woman and that all these messages were fabrications, unsupported by any actual evidence. Dave's life descended into a living hell. Everyone began to avoid him and his workshop, and many people developed a strong dislike for him. By that juncture, the missing woman had been out of touch for over 3 weeks, and the police had been unsuccessful in tracking her movements, her cell phone, or her vehicle. There were no bank card transactions. There was every reason to suspect she might be deceased. It became imperative to locate her body and ascertain what had transpired, as the missing person's relatives desperately needed answers. Dave continued to be subjected to terror, compelling him to contact the police once more. However, law enforcement officers were deeply engrossed in the case of his girlfriend's disappearance. They lacked the resources to assist him with his separate issue. Therefore, they showed little interest in his account of the suspicious text messages. In January 2013, Dave happened to spot the Ford Explorer car belonging to Carrie in a parking lot near an apartment complex, but it was unoccupied. The man immediately alerted the police, after which officers arrived to examine the vehicle. The car had a scratch along one side, but there were no fingerprints on the exterior or the steering wheel. Strangely, there were no fingerprints on the steering wheel at all, not even Carrie's, as if someone had deliberately wiped them clean. They did, however, discover a single fingerprint on a container of mints that was inside the car. But when they cross-referenced the print with the national database, they found no match. It didn't belong to Carrie either. The car was remarkably clean, apart from a small pinkish stain on the passenger seat that resembled a spilled strawberry dessert. Following the inspection, the car was returned to Carrie's parents, who subsequently sold it. Meanwhile, the threats directed at Dave had begun to take on a more sinister quality. The man frequently received pictures of his own windows, accompanied by captions asserting that the sender possessed a spare key, would soon break into his house, and that a knife would pierce his heart. They also sent photographs of his children along with death threats. Later, the intruder began threatening him with violence against his acquaintance Liz. One day, he was sent a picture of a woman bearing a striking resemblance to Liz, tied up in the trunk of a car. Dave panicked and immediately called her to ensure his acquaintance was unharmed. Liz was at home at the time. During moments like these, he tried to brush it off, thinking it was all just a malicious prank. The man waited for this nightmare to end. This troubling situation gradually drew him closer to Liz, who was also being targeted by an intruder. The harasser blamed Liz for the dissolution of Dave and Carrie's relationship, and the police also considered her a person of interest in Carrie's disappearance. They started communicating more frequently, sharing their worries and anxieties. Often, Dave and Liz would be watching a movie together when both their phones would receive threatening and abusive messages almost at the same instant. After receiving several menacing photos of himself and his children, Dave felt compelled to contact the police again. In response to his report about online threats and harassment, The investigators merely gestured helplessly. It was apparent that no one was going to divert resources to address his problem. Consequently, Dave submitted an application to the special Omaha unit that handled such cases, but this police department had only one officer specializing in this area. At that time, this officer was juggling 94 cases simultaneously and was physically incapable of responding to or assisting Dave in any meaningful way. A desperate Dave literally had no alternative but to accept the situation and continue living with it. He began to suspect that Carrie was alive, had perhaps fled while experiencing a severe mental health episode, and was now terrorizing him and others, though there was no concrete evidence to support this. Carrie's father passed away, and her family grew increasingly worried when she failed to attend the funeral. Instead, they received text messages from her, offering apologies, but no one had heard her actual voice in months. Carrie's family came to the realization that something was seriously amiss and that she was not the one sending these messages. In the spring of 2013, an unidentified man called Carrie's mother, introducing himself as Dave Krupka. He informed the distressed mother that Carrie had supposedly called him, stating she was at a homeless shelter in Omaha and wished to be picked up. Carrie's hopeful parents reported this to the police, and together they went to the shelter, only to discover that Carrie was not there and never had been. It was later established that the caller was not Dave Krupka, and the incident was merely a cruel hoax. Through legal proceedings, Carrie's parents obtained custody of her son, who had been residing with them all along. Meanwhile, Dave and Liz's relationship evolved into a turbulent, on-again, off-again affair. For months, they vacillated back and forth. Liz became increasingly possessive and kept him constantly on edge. Dave started to observe that whenever he was on the verge of ending things with her, the threatening text messages, purportedly from Carrie, would resume. He found this to be a strange coincidence, but theorized that someone might be monitoring them. They finally ended their relationship for good in August 2013, primarily due to Dave's reluctance to commit to a serious relationship with Liz. Soon after, Liz's garage was broken into and vandalized, with offensive messages about her. The landlady scrawled on it. A few days later, Dave learned that Liz's rented house had caught fire. The blaze was not extensive, so emergency responders managed to save the structure, but the interior required repairs. Tragically, animals, 2 dogs, a cat, and a snake that lived with the family perished in the fire. Consequently, she and her 2 children temporarily moved in with relatives. Liz claimed to the police that the arson was Carrie's doing, alleging that Carrie had been persistently threatening her and had now escalated from threats to direct action. At this juncture, the stalker who had been terrorizing Dave, supposedly on Carrie's behalf, effectively pleaded guilty to the garage robbery and the arson by sending messages claiming responsibility. Dave then received a peculiar message, signed as if from Carrie. In it, the author claimed to be pregnant with Dave's child. But Dave knew this was a fabrication because he had undergone a vasectomy several years prior and was incapable of fathering children. He also knew that Carrie had undergone a hysterectomy, which made it impossible for her to conceive, even if she wanted to. This message planted serious doubts in his mind about whether Carrie was genuinely the one writing to him. 2 months later, a bright orange sign appeared at his auto shop, proclaiming that Dave was an abuser of women. In January 2014, a longtime male friend came to stay with him for a visit. During the night, a few hours after the pair had gone to bed, a brick was hurled through the bathroom window. Throughout this period, the nervous tension experienced by the man being stalked reached a critical point. He recognized that the situation was spiraling out of control and becoming perilous. Given the lack of action from the police, Dave decided to make a drastic change. He relocated to a different house and secured new employment. The man also changed his phone number and all his contact details, and for protection, he purchased a firearm. In this manner, he effectively vanished from all radars for a considerable stretch of time, maintaining no communication with anyone. However, in due course, his primary vulnerability resurfaced. He registered on a dating site once more, albeit under a different alias, and arranged to meet a new woman. The woman never arrived for the date. Instead, he received a threatening message, ostensibly from Carrie. It transpired that the woman from a dating site had also received a similar menacing message, which was why she failed to show up, deterred by the threats. Liz also received an irate message. It was an email from someone named Amy Flora, which was the name of Dave's ex-wife. Liz then conjectured that it might be his ex-wife who was the stalker, posing as the missing Carrie to torment Dave and all his associates for what was now over 3 years. Since Liz had no way to contact Dave directly, she approached the police with this information. By filing a stalking report, she presented a version that, on the surface, seemed rather improbable. Amy, in fact, had plausible reasons to harbor resentment towards her ex-husband concerning their divorce. During this same time frame, Dave's firearm vanished from his house without a trace, implying that someone had unlawfully entered his home and that he could be in imminent danger. The man reported this to the police, as the situation had once again escalated beyond his control. After all these developments, the police finally resolved to investigate the stalking situation more thoroughly. Naturally, their primary interest lay in its connection to the missing Carrie. A re-interview of Dave was conducted, which confirmed that he was indeed not implicated in her disappearance. Furthermore, after acquiring more information, investigators began to doubt that the missing woman was the one threatening her former boyfriend and other individuals. They couldn't comprehend why someone who had dated Dave for merely a couple of weeks would dedicate years to pursuing him and all the women in his circle, and in doing so, abandon her entire life, her family, her home, her successful career, all for him. It simply defied logic. It appeared as though someone had pilfered her identity and was using it for stalking purposes. On December 5, 2015, Liz Golar, the former acquaintance of the stalked Dave, dialed 911. She reported an assault that occurred while she was walking home late at night along a park trail. The woman stated she saw a shadow emerge from the darkness. Then she was attacked from behind and asked if she liked Dave, immediately after which a gunshot was fired. The victim claimed she was able to get a clear look at the assailant. The attacker, she said, was a woman resembling Amy Flora, Dave's ex-wife. This woman allegedly shot her victim in the leg before disappearing into the night. Fortunately, Liz sustained only a minor injury and was taken to the hospital. The police officers decided to speak with Amy and proceeded to her residence. They needed to ascertain specific details to formulate a charge against the woman and confirm if she was indeed the shooter. But Amy denied any involvement. During their conversation, police learned that she, too, had been subjected to numerous threats from an unidentified woman. According to Amy, she had recently reconnected with her ex-husband Dave and was subsequently bombarded with a torrent of aggressive messages, warning her to cease communication with him. The woman consented to a search of her home, during which nothing suspicious was discovered. Furthermore, Amy possessed a solid alibi for the time of the attack on Liz. Detectives began to corroborate this information. Her alibi, as well as the threatening letters she had received, were confirmed, and Amy was consequently removed from the list of suspects. However, Liz persisted in her assertion that Amy was her attacker. She couldn't adequately explain how she had managed to see the shooter's face so distinctly in the dark, especially in a state of terror. No one found her account credible. As purported proof, Liz presented a printed message from Amy, allegedly confessing to the attack, which she claimed Amy had emailed to her. The confession contained highly detailed information regarding Carrie's abduction on the morning of November 13, 2012. It stated Carrie logged onto her social media page around 6:45 a.m. The next time she accessed, it was 3 hours later, to remove Dave from her friends list. According to Amy's confession, this was the time frame when she kidnapped Carrie. The author of the letter accurately described Carrie's tattoos, including one not mentioned in the missing persons flyers. The letter detailed that Carrie had been stabbed in her abdomen or chest and then burned beyond recognition before being disposed of in a dumpster. The details included information about Carrie's car and home that had not been previously publicized. This led police to believe that the letter's author had indeed seen her body and that Carrie had actually been murdered over 3 years prior. However, they did not believe Amy had committed the crime, much less that she would have written a confession letter herself and signed it with her own name. The entire scenario seemed like an amateurish setup. Investigators grew suspicious of Liz Golar, who had provided this email allegedly from Amy. An examination of Liz's phone uncovered information she had deleted. They discovered Liz was utilizing an app that encrypted her location, making it challenging to trace where messages originated. Another application she employed was designed to delay the sending of messages, which could explain how she might have received a message, purportedly from Carrie, while in Dave's presence. The missing person's mother, Nancy, became involved in the investigation. She suspected that the messages sent to relatives by Carrie before her disappearance had been authored by someone else. This was suggested by grammatical errors and a writing style uncharacteristic of Carrie, who was always polite and very literate. Among the valuable pieces of information police obtained from Nancy was a check. It was written for the transportation of her daughter's furniture, which Carrie had supposedly sold remotely after she vanished. The check was made out to Shauna, Liz Golar. It also came to light that Carrie's supervisor had received a letter of resignation. In this letter, Carrie indicated that a friend of hers would be applying for her position, and the friend she named was Shauna Golar. Liz, in fact, did apply to the company for Carrie's job shortly thereafter, but she failed to meet even the minimum qualifications for such a role and was consequently rejected. The case grew increasingly convoluted, and it was unclear what exactly was transpiring. But one thing became evident. Carrie did not consider Liz a friend close enough to vouch for her and offer her job, nor would she entrust her with access to her belongings and finances. Something was clearly amiss. It appeared that Liz had become utterly obsessed with Dave. She set fire to the rental house she occupied, damaged her car and garage, and her pets perished in the blaze. The woman even shot herself, all in an effort to terrorize Dave, her secret love interest for years. It was difficult to fathom, yet the investigators persisted with the case, determined to uncover the truth. When Dave learned about the checks, he was astounded by Liz's duplicity, as she had managed to conceal her actions for such an extended period. She had dispatched over 15,000 messages in 3 years. This endeavor consumed 50 to 70 hours a week, akin to a full-time occupation. She utilized a timer to delay sending messages, ensuring she could always produce an alibi. All of this was driven solely by the possessive feelings she harbored for the victim of her stalking. She was unwilling to share Dave with other women and endeavored to win him back at any cost, a goal she nearly achieved. Dave reflected on the situation and concluded that Liz might indeed be behind the harassment. He recalled that when they were together, the frequency of messages decreased significantly, which seemed odd. However, as soon as they separated, the influx of messages would surge, a pattern that was difficult to explain. But the police still needed to substantiate all of this. The detectives began to question Liz cautiously as soon as she was discharged from the hospital following the gunshot wound. It was crucial to obtain any information that could lead the investigation to Carrie. During the interrogation, the woman was highly agitated. She argued very aggressively that Amy Flora should be incarcerated, claiming she was clearly a menace to society. Liz produced new letters, supposedly from Amy, in which Amy continued to confess to Carrie's murder, revealing all the details, such as Carrie having been killed in her own car on the passenger side. However, the detectives knew this was untrue and that Amy had no involvement. The officers informed her that Amy was now with her ex-husband, Dave, to gauge Liz's reaction. This produced the anticipated effect. The woman began to lose her composure and became visibly furious. The police officers continued their ruse, informing her that substantial evidence was needed to press charges against Amy. They feigned an attempt to link Amy to Carrie's disappearance, an accusation Liz had made. The interrogated woman started to divulge more and more details of the crime. But how could she possess such knowledge? Police officers managed to track down Carrie's car, which her parents had sold, and secure permission from the new owners to inspect it. During this inspection, the seat covers were removed, and beneath them, a large bloodstain was discovered on the seat, along with smaller stains underneath. Analysis confirmed that the DNA belonged to Carrie, who had been missing for 3 years. There were also traces of DNA belonging to Liz, who should not have had any reason to be in the missing person's car. All of this intensified the suspicions against her. Investigators later found thousands of photographs on the suspect's computer. Most were selfies, but one particular image showed a leg with signs of decomposition. Police were able to identify it from tattoos that were identical to those Carrie had. During a protracted investigation, they determined that the IP address from which the emails containing Amy's confessions, as well as the threats from Carrie, were sent belonged to the same individual, a man named Garrett. Garrett was cohabiting with a woman he had considered his partner for many years. That woman was Shauna Golar. It transpired that after the fire, Shauna and her children had moved in with him, and the man had been providing for them. He had no inkling that his beloved was weaving a complex web of intrigue and lies around the story of Carrie's disappearance. Police officers were unable to find anything of significance when they searched Garrett's residence, but an examination of her former home yielded new evidence. Officers discovered several cell phones and electronic devices, including a camera that belonged to Carrie. It was proven that one of the cell phones found had been used to call Carrie's mother on the day Dave claimed she was at a homeless shelter. The phone had a voice-changing application installed on it. Detectives finally matched the fingerprints found on the pack of mints in Carrie's car to Liz's fingerprints, and they were a perfect match. The cynicism with which the perpetrator operated was extraordinary, even by the standards of the criminal underworld. For reasons entirely unknown, she cruelly offered false hope to the mother and son of the missing person with her messages, and for a period, they believed that Carrie was alive, albeit unwell and in need of assistance. Things escalated to the point where the missing woman's son, Max, 3 years after his mother's tragic disappearance, sent a text message to the number from which he had last received a message from her. The teenager wrote, "If it's really you, come back. I want you to be with me at prom." Based on all this accumulated evidence, Liz Golar was arrested in December 2016 and charged with first-degree murder, concealment of evidence and a body, and arson. Her defense team chose a bench trial, where her guilt would be determined by a judge rather than a jury. The prosecution contended that the defendant stabbed Carrie to death in November 2012 inside the victim's own car. They believed Liz confronted Carrie as she was leaving Dave's house and heading towards her vehicle. It was at that moment, they argued, that Liz attacked her. The prosecution presented all the compiled evidence pointing to Liz as corroboration, but the defense contested this. The defense attorney argued that the fingerprints on the mint package could have been left at an earlier time when the women briefly encountered each other near Dave's house, and Carrie might have later brought the package into her car. However, other pieces of evidence were irrefutable. IP address and cell phone data indicated that Liz was the one who had been conducting the correspondences, providing all the intricate details of the murder. A significant bloodstain was found on and under the front passenger seat. But if Liz hadn't killed her, how could she have known that the murder occurred in that specific spot? Furthermore, how could she have been privy to the other details? Also, the defendant was unable to explain how a photograph of the deceased woman's leg, identified by the tattoo, ended up on her phone. Another disturbing story involving her surfaced during the trial. Liz once had a young son named Cody. Cody's father, who had an intellectual disability, deeply cherished his son. When the boy was discovered unconscious, it was determined that he died from shaken baby syndrome. Cody's father confessed to the crime and was imprisoned, despite his family's staunch belief that Liz herself had killed the child and had manipulated the man into confessing. It also came to light that the stalking of Dave Krupka was not Liz's only instance of such behavior. After the father of Liz's other child ended their relationship, she relentlessly pursued his new girlfriend. Liz did not desist, even after they married and the couple had a child together. Even when they eventually divorced, Liz continued to stalk the woman, even though the perceived threat had seemingly been removed. The harassed woman eventually had to relocate to find peace. Ultimately, on August 15, 2017, Liz Golar was found guilty on all charges. However, she did not admit guilt to any of the accusations, including the arson. She displayed no signs of remorse. In her defense, she attempted to elicit sympathy and appeal to human compassion. Her attorney requested a sentence of no more than 30 years for the court, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The prosecutor's office emphasized at trial that Liz exhibited no traits of humanity and therefore was undeserving of leniency. Liz Golar was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 20 years for the arson of the house. She continues to deny her guilt and is attempting to appeal the verdict, stating that she will not cease her fight and will ensure that the true perpetrator, who she claims is still at large, is brought to justice. Carrie's family was never able to recover her body. Its location could not be determined. More than anything, her friends and family wish to find her remains so they can cremate them and scatter her ashes to the wind, as was her personal wish. If you appreciated my coverage of this case, please subscribe to the channel, support this video with a like, and let's discuss this story in the comments. I also recommend checking out these other videos. Thank you all, and goodbye for now.